watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture.
I'm Mark Golub. Ask most American Jews about the settlements on the West Bank, and they'll tell you that the settlements may have been the single greatest mistake in Israeli policy since the establishment of the State of Israel, because settlements only inflame Palestinian sensibilities and are therefore an ongoing obstacle to peace. Ask most American Jews about the settlers on the West Bank, and they'll tell you they're right-wing fanatics who believe in God's promise in the Bible to give all the land of Eretz Yisrael, what was in biblical times Eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan, to the Jewish people as an everlasting possession, and that it's the right-wing mentality which serves as an obstacle to peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Well, just how much of these common perceptions of West Bank settlements and West Bank settlers are accurate? For some insight into the real world of the settler community, we have for you now a meeting with an extraordinary man who's known as the mayor of Gush Etzion, the collection of Israeli settlements to the southeast of Jerusalem, as far south as Hebron, Shaul Goldstein. And as the leader of Gush Etzion, Shaul Goldstein is the driving force behind the region's economic development, turning the region into a hotbed of industry and economic growth. In the 9 years since he assumed office, the population of Gush Etzion has more than doubled from 25,000 to roughly 60,000 people. 400 houses are under construction, new schools have been built, and tourist attractions have been added in the area. A technology park provides jobs, and new industries are opened. Shaul Goldstein grew up in a secular Jewish home, but became observant at the age of 25. And as a result, he has a real sensitivity to the issues that sometimes divide the Orthodox and non-Orthodox communities, both in Gush Etzion and throughout Israel. It's a pleasure then to introduce to you Shaul Goldstein. And Shaul, welcome, my friend.
Thank you.
So Shaul, there's so many questions I have for you. You heard me talk about the common conception or misconception that American Jews have of who in the world the settler community is. I first want to ask you, from your perspective, was the creation of settlements on the West Bank one of the single most serious mistakes in Israeli policy since the establishment of the State of Israel?
On the contrary, I think the only way to strengthen Israel and to make sure that Israel is going to stay in the Middle East is to hold on to those hills. I must be frank, and it always shocks me that why people divide the belongings to 67 before and after. Why a settlement previous to 1967, it's legitimate, it's okay, it's our heritage.
For example?
Tel Aviv, Ramat Aviv, Afula, Be'er Sheva, those settlements. We came to the desert. 200 years ago, the Jews came to the desert. When my father made Aliyah to Eretz Israel in 1939, there was a couple 100,000 Jews in Israel. So he made a settlement. He lived near the Galilee Sea. Then we moved to the desert, to the Negev. And then it was not a settlement. After 67, we came to other places in the land of Israel, and suddenly they became settlements. And more than that, my father, who was not a religious guy, told me always that his father taught him that when you have to come back to the land of Israel in one day, you're going to return to Hebron, to Bethlehem, to Jerusalem. He didn't mention Tel Aviv, that didn't exist then. He didn't mention Haifa. He didn't mention those seashore towns that most of the Israeli population is living there. So from my point of view, if you're talking about the moral, you cannot separate it between and after 67. The land of Israel belongs to the people of Israel always.
Okay. I want to try to express for you how people would answer you. no one disagrees that Israel is basically what became the kingdom first of David and then of Shlomo, the great kingdoms of King David and even extraordinarily, the extraordinary broad kingdom of Solomon. And that in fact Judea, Samaria, from as far south to as far north and as far way beyond the Jordan River at one point was the land of Israel. But then there became a political reality, a modern political reality. The United Nations votes a partition plan, and the Jewish agency, the Yishuv, accepts the partition plan and accepts a piece of what was ancient Israel as a modern state. The Arab world does not accept it. We go to war on May 14th, 15th, 1948. And as a result of that war, certain boundaries are established, what became known as the Green Line for a whole host of reasons. But that became the recognized international border of a modern state of Israel. We're not talking here about the land of Israel. We're talking about a modern state of Israel. And that the issue that most people see when they discuss the entire Palestinian conflict, the Israeli-Arab conflict as it was known prior to '67, was that how do Jews and non-Jews in the region come to some solution, working it out, living together side by side. And that after '67, what were the borders up until that point were no longer applicable, as the state of Israel ends up with the West Bank, it ends up with Gaza, it ends up with the Golan Heights. And my reading of history, and Shaul, if you read it differently, I want to hear. My reading of history is that the initial reaction of the state, the government of the state of Israel after '67, the initial reaction was the Arabs can have every piece of this land back politically for one thing: true and honest peace. And then the Arabs went to Khartoum and gave us the three no's: no recognition, no compromise, no peace. And Israel is left now with what becomes the West Bank. Not because it was promised to the Jews in the Bible, not because it's your father's Israel, but because a piece of territory once carved out by the United Nations is now under Israeli military control, and it has been so on the West Bank to this very day. And the question becomes, from an American Jewish perspective, and I believe even from some Israeli perspective, what is the best way for the state of Israel, a political entity, not your father's dream, a political entity, to deal with territory and human beings who are not Jewish on the West Bank? And those who would stand against you would say, look, I appreciate the sentiment, but there is a realpolitik here. And the realpolitik requires the Jew to live side by side in some compromise with the Arab population, the Palestinian population. And what you're suggesting, Shaul Goldstein, makes that compromise impossible. That's the reason you hear the argument that a Tel Aviv is not the same as a settlement or a kibbutz on the other side of the Green Line. How did I do it?
You asked 1,000 questions.
No, I gave you a statement. What do you think?
Frankly, that you're wrong. This statement is wrong. And I have to comment many things. I hope I remember all the points. First of all, many Israeli cities inside the Green Line, pre-'67, are out of the partition plan of the UN. The '67 borders are not a partition plan.
That's correct.
The partition plan, if, let's say, we would have given the UN to decide our borders, and we'll go into their borders, no more Israel. Israel cannot defend itself by that.
And again, I don't
so
want,
this is first of all.
Okay, but I want to make sure I give you the chance to explain it in a way that our audience will understand. I am not suggesting that Israel ended up with a partition plan because the Arabs attacked the state of Israel and would not accept the partition plan. The result of the first war, or what I call Battle of Independence, I believe Israel is in a 60-year-long war with major battles at given moments. The first battle was in 1948. Okay. And as a result of what the Arabs called a ceasefire, not a peace, certain ceasefire lines were determined internationally. And that became known as the Green Line. And Israel benefited from the Arab war because it ended up with more territory than it would have received if it had accepted, if the Arabs had accepted the partition plan. But still, juridically, internationally, by law, what the world accepted was lines drawn after the War of Independence.
What I know, it's most of the world did not recognize 67 borders because they knew that it's intermediate. It's still, as you said, we are still in continuous wars with our neighbors. Second of all, I think around the world, you can see it very clearly after the Second World War, that countries that attacked and were occupied, the border was changed. You can see it all over the world. So only Israel should be attacked and give up the security? It doesn't go like that. So first of all, if someone knows the shape of the land of Israel, you can see a cut in Israel. There's the seashore, the Mediterranean, then the hills of Jerusalem, where I'm living, 1,000 meters, 3,000, more than 3,000 feet altitude, and back to the Dead Sea. So you want our enemies to sit on the mountains and control all the seashore of Israel, where the population is? So many things to say, but I began saying that the moral issue. Morally, the land of Israel historically belonged to the Jewish people. When I'm looking about United States is a society of immigrants. They came from all over the world. What makes America a nation? A place, language, history. It's a very short history. Sometimes when I went to Mesa Verde, and there was the ranger telling me the prehistorical sites. Finally, I asked him, what is prehistory here? And he said, 400 years ago. So I told him, I'm living in a place that I can see an ancient history of 2,000 and 3,000 years old. So for us, prehistory is back 5,000, 6,000. Anyway, so a nation is composed of certain definitions. The Jewish people has a land, this is the Eretz Israel, has a language, which is Hebrew, and has faith, which is Judaism, no matter what kind of Judaism, but Judaism. So altogether, and the history, of course. The history of the Jewish people did not start 400 years ago. Unfortunately or fortunately, the history of the Jewish people started about 3,500 years ago when Abram decided to be the first Jew. This is our heritage. Nobody can change it. So for us, for the Jewish people, the history tells you that Hebron belongs to the Jewish people. Now you're asking me a different question. After you put aside the moral issue. Morally, Hebron is ours. Now you're saying to me, listen, in Hebron there are 100,000 Arabs. In Bethlehem there are 60,000 Arabs. What are you going to do? You want to coexist. You want to live. You don't want wars. This is a totally different question. Now you're asking me practically, pragmatically, how we can live in coexistence in the Middle East. And then I will ask more questions. First of all, who wants to coexist with me? Show me the first Arab leader, real leader, that won't coexist with me. Not the settler. I'm talking about Israel. How we have peace with Egypt. We have peace with Jordan, cold peace. Nobody's coming to visit from Egypt and Jordan in Israel as a tourist. If a journalist is coming to Israel and reporting positively about Israel, he's boycotted in his country. What kind of the education textbooks, what they're telling about? So who wants to really coexist with me? From my point of view, if I'm looking in a broader scale, I'm in the satellite looking in the world, the problem is not with me, it's with you. In the educational system of the Palestinians mainly, but also in Egypt and Jordan, the big Satan, the big devil, is not the settlers, is not Israelis, is not even the Jews. The big Satan is you, the Americans. So they don't want to coexist with you, not with us. And the clash is not between the settlers and the Palestinians. The clash is between civilizations. They don't want an outpost, a Western outpost in the Middle East. And Israel is a Western outpost in the Middle East. They don't want us. As if they don't want the American army in Iraq. Just like they don't want British interference in Afghanistan. Just like some of them does not want the symbols of the West in Afghanistan, the Taliban.
Are you suggesting then that when the American media or the American Jewish community tends to discuss the issue of some kind of two-state solution and some kind of compromise between the Palestinian community and the Jewish Israeli community that by bringing up the issue of the settlements, it's really a red herring, that really it's not the ikar, not the essence of the problem, and that as far as the Palestinian is concerned, the problem will be just as volatile if the settlements were or were not there.
I tell you more than that, you're right. First of all, I think they understand the Palestinian, by the way, the Palestinian liberation movement were established in '64, before we went into Judea and Samaria, what they call the West Bank. The main purpose of the Palestinians and all the extremists is to eliminate Israel, period. And they understand, by the way, this is why one of our truth, how to say it, they understand that eliminating the settlements, or the towns which are 300,000 Jews living in them, eliminating them is destruction of Israel, is weakening Israel on the way to destruction. And this is what they want it. They understand it. It's not new to them.
Do average Israelis understand it the same way?
What is average Israeli today? I think average Israeli today is pretty confused. You know, everybody is selling this slogan, two-state solution.
Yes. What do you think of it?
I think it's three-state problem.
Three-state problem.
Why? I'll explain. What is a two-state solution? One Palestinian state, one Jewish state, and this is a solution. Now they will coexist. I'm telling the opposite. First of all, they have a state. We cannot ignore it. Jordan is between 65 to 80% Palestinians. So how do you call Jordan? What nation lives in Jordan? They're not the Jordanians. They're Hashemites and they're Palestinians. Hashemites were brought by the British mandate from Saudi Arabia into Jordan. The Jordanians, most Jordanians are Palestinians, so they have already state. Now they want to give you another state, which is Judea and Samaria. But still, they have Gaza Strip right now. They took over Gaza Strip. Israel ran away out of Gaza Strip. So they will have Jordan, they will have Judea and Samaria, they will have Gaza Strip. 3 states. And now let's examine whether it's a solution or a problem. Tell me what the Palestinians will do on the mountains, surrounded by other countries, no access to the sea, no infrastructure. The Palestinians never tried to develop any kind of infrastructure. So everybody will tell me, Israel didn't give them the chance to do it. It's wrong. The Jewish people came to Ottoman Empire. We came to the British mandate, and we developed all the time power plants, electrical power plants, water, agriculture, industry of medicine, very good hospitals, academy, good army, very big high-tech. We developed it all along the years. What did the Palestinians did to develop their country, their own country, in the last 150 years? Before Israel came. After Israel came, 19 years they had Judea and Samaria. Gush Etzion they had for 19 years, from 48 to 67. What did they achieve in Gush Etzion in 19 years? Come and see what we achieved in 19 years. Now they have Gaza Strip. Since 1993, this is the Oslo Accord, Israel went out. Only Jewish settlements were there, the Jewish communities, which is a very small portion. The rest was Arab. What did they do to develop Gaza Strip then? You gave them money. The EU gave them money. The UN gave them money. Japan gave them money. What did they do with the money? Most of it went to corruption. Did they develop democracy? Did they develop a regime that controls the benefit of the human beings, or rather the terror and terror and terror? Did they develop industry? Did they develop tourism? Now they distracted. We went out of Gaza Strip. They have the beautiful, most beautiful communities that we left. Most beautiful. What did they do with it? It's already 2 years. Believe me, if it's the opposite with Israel, it will flourish it. Look in Singapore what happened. Look in Hong Kong what happened in very small places, very crowded, but they have the chance, they want to develop. So if they're not going to do it, because of their reasons, I'm not a judge to judge whether it's good or bad, but what they're going to do? Israel will be in the middle, surrounded by very poor states. Israel will be rich, will be nice, green country. So this can bring peace. Just look what we have with Mexico. United States and Mexico, for sure, you have the warmest peace, and I hope Israel will have some kind of this kind of peace. Let's do in the border between Mexico and the United States. So even the borders with Israel and the Palestinians, and we want to separate the societies. This is the assumption behind the suggestion. We don't want to let people move because we want to separate. Maybe in the future we can change it. So they won't have work. They will be poor. The regime is still corrupted. No democratic reforms. So what will happen? Tension, friction all the time. So I think it's between 3 to 4 states problem and not even a single solution.
Okay. I understand exactly what you're saying, and you articulate it beautifully. So there are 2 questions to ask you. Number 1, what's your answer then? If a 2-state, and I appreciate, I think many viewers do not understand the extent to which Jordan is in fact a Palestinian populated state, which, as you point out, was created artificially by the British beginning in 1922. And many Americans, many American Jews think Jordan is an ancient country. It's a modern country created by the United Nations after the 1922 act by Winston Churchill, who lopped off 80% of what was then the Palestinian Mandate and gave it to the Hashemite Kingdom, and basically it's Jordanian. I understand. And I always appreciate somebody who has a sense of history as you do, because American Jews and Americans don't know history. Okay, good. And you may be right. At the moment, all the evidence is on your side, that when you give up land, whether it's Gaza or any other piece of land, the Palestinians so far has not used that land and that opportunity to better their people. But the question is asked of you twofold. Number 1, so what's the solution to Israel living in peace? And I assume that ultimately, if I were a member of Gush Etzion, or if I lived in Jerusalem, or if I lived in Ashkelon, or if I lived in Sderot, I would want one thing. I don't want my children to be in danger. I don't want my wife to be in danger, and quite honestly, I don't want to be in danger. So the question that's asked of you, if the two-state solution, which you call is really a 3-state solution, 4-state solution, right, is not an answer, what is Shaul Goldstein's answer? That's question number 1, and I want you to stay with that, but I'm going to anticipate question number 2, which is, do you believe that there are any Palestinian mothers and fathers, not leaders, mothers and fathers, who, if you had the opportunity to sit with them as you and I are sitting, would any of them share the Jewish goal of just, let's work it out and live in peace, as opposed to it being an issue of a corrupt Palestinian leadership? But I want you to take them in order. The first question is, then what in the world do you do to ultimately create some kind of peaceful existence? I didn't even say coexistence. Existence for you and the Israeli people.
Can I make it opposite?
Absolutely. I would be very pleased.
Yes, I know a lot of moderate Arabs. I have a lot of friends. I used to be a constructor. I built houses all over Israel. I employed personally about 80 Arabs a day, and they became friends. And till today, we keep connections. My municipality, I have a lot of Arab workers. Even during the Intifada, during the war, they kept working with me. And I have a lot of honor and respect to those people.
You do?
Yeah, of course.
And
I don't hate them at all.
What does it mean when you say you have friends? Did you visit their homes? Do you know their wives? Do you know their children? Did you share food with them? What does it mean that you were friends with Palestinians?
Friends means that we're going to vacations together.
Really? Okay, that's a friend.
That the children are coming to my house and playing with my computers with my children. It means that if any holiday, Eid al-Adha or Eid al-Fitr, the 2 Muslim holidays, I'm going to visit them. When we have celebrations, they're coming to visit us with big delegations. Well, of course, we're eating together. Can a Jew and Arab meet and not eat something? Come on, we're not Americans. We have to.
Shaul, would it surprise you to know that most American Jews do not have that image at all, especially of the settler community, but even of the Israeli community in general. American Jews don't imagine you're celebrating Palestinian holidays or your children spending time with Palestinian children on computer. It's not something we ever imagine. Does that surprise you?
I'll give you more than that. I attended to my colleague, Palestinian colleague, which is the mayor of the region of the Palestinians. I told him, listen, on the roads, when there's a car accident, you don't ask whether you are Arab or Jew. You get killed. Let's fight together the car accident. So he agreed. The first cooperation between settlers and Arabs, and we made big signs along the roads of Gush Etzion, half in Hebrew, half in Arabic. He signed his side, I signed my side. And I can tell you the people are coming from Hebron or from other places around Israel. They're stopping near the signs. They're stepping out of the cars, watching, don't understand how it come. How come Abu Isa and Shaul Goldstein, the Jewish settler, signing together the same? And we were willing to make much more advanced cooperation with the Arabs. The problem is Ramallah. Abu Mazen won't let them. I want to hook them to my sewage infrastructure, to the water infrastructure. We cannot do it.
Because?
Because Ramallah, the government of the Palestinians won't let us.
Why won't they?
They don't want any cooperation with us.
Why?
Because they think that cooperating with us is legitimizing us. I'll tell you one story. Once we invited the mayors around us to a national exercise. In case of earthquake, what we're going to do. So I told their mayors, listen, if there's earthquake, it's not it will hit only Jews, it will hit you as well. So I have ambulances and medical staff. You have tractors and bulldozers. You can help us dig. So let's cooperate. They say, well, very good suggestion. So the exercise was Monday. They gathered all the mayors on Saturday night. They called Ramallah, and they were forbidden to come. So they don't join our exercise, which is a very big national-wide exercise. Half a year afterwards, we had another exercise nearby. This time they attended because the only reason was they didn't ask Ramallah. This time they understood the benefit they're going to have out of this exercise. And believe me, I won't tell you the names of those people because they will be in danger in their cities. So people are motivating by stereotypes. They're the stereotype of the Jew, the stereotype of the Arab, the stereotype of the settler, the stereotype of other people, famous people. I think it's wrong, especially in a generation of the internet, that everything is so exposed. Come and see. Visit our website. Enter it. Go and say gushetzion.org.il and go to see what is Gush Etzion really like. And believe me, some Israelis does not recognize Gush Etzion, doesn't know Gush Etzion. I'm taking people to visit Gush Etzion. Wow. And it's 10 minutes from Jerusalem. Gush Etzion is a suburb of Jerusalem. From my home to Jerusalem, 8 minutes. What is 8 minutes in Manhattan? Is 4 blocks, 10 blocks? How much is it? So I think one of my jobs, main jobs, was to expose. And when you're exposing things, you can connect.
Okay. You're describing a situation in which people to people, there is real opportunity, not only for cooperation, but for understanding, the nefesh of another person. It sounds to me like there are people you really respect and admire as people in the Palestinian community. You've already said you don't hate them, correct?
Of course.
Okay. So the issue is not a personal one. It becomes a structural, bureaucratic, governmental issue. And so now we come to what you now want to do as the second question.
Okay.
The second question is, okay, so we now know how you feel about these people, that ultimately you can live with them. You can live with them in your home. You don't mind your children playing with their children. You want to cooperate with them. By the way, it gives me chills to hear you describe your life with your Palestinian friends. And again, I'll say, I don't know how much of what you say would be surprising to some Israelis. I promise you, there are American Jews and Americans in general watching you right now who are hearing something they have not imagined. You are doing a wonderful service just by describing this for us. Then the question is, if you don't believe in a two-state solution, which you call really a four-state solution. So what's your answer?
On this, I'm not sure I have an answer. Because if I would have an answer, so someone pick it up and execute it. Sometimes in life, you don't have solutions to all the problems. I'm an engineer in my job, and I know so many problems that I cannot solve. My father passed away out of heart attack. Someone can solve him. Someone can save him. People with cancer, can you save them? Sometimes you cannot solve all the problems. In this problem, you have to know the problem first in order to find a solution. If you are defining the problem as we need peace, okay. Peace is the most fabulous word. It's one of the names of God in Judaism. So we need peace. We want peace. I have two sons in the army, a son and a daughter in the army. So I don't want to get hurt. I love them so much. And I'm sure other people as well. Okay, I want peace. What is the list of peace? What is peace for me? Okay, made the Middle East. Now let's go to the Palestinians. What is the peace for you? Do you want to live with peace with Jews? And this I will tell you, on the contrary of what I described before. I have friends with Palestinians. I'm working with them. I'm playing. No problem. I respect them. Really, truly, I respect them. Once I asked one of my best friends who worked for me, tell me, Ahmed, the real truth. If God can give you the solution, what would you have chosen? And he said, a Palestinian state. And I said, what about us? He said, you have to pay taxes to the Palestinian state, to the Muslim state. I said, you mean Gush Etzion? He said, no, entire Israel. I said, what do you mean? Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa? He said, of course. I said, why? You're my friend. And he said, it's not allowed to have a non-Muslim state in the Middle East. It's impossible. We'll fight it. Now we coexist with you. Now it's nice. You're a nice person. We let you stay in your house. But you have to pay taxes to the Islam. You cannot pay taxes to a Jewish state. Even in Tel Aviv, I'm not talking about only Gush Etzion. So I'm asking myself, if it's true, what kind of peace do they want? So if you redefine the problem, redefining the problem is not that we both want peace and some magic should come in and say, okay, this is the line, the separation fence, other lines, the green line, they will solve the problem. No, they don't want the Israeli state. And if this is the problem, we'll fight. Because this is our only state. The Arabs has 22 countries, 500 times the size of Israel. We have a very tiny state, very concentrated, very populated. We cannot afford to not have an independent state. So if this is the problem, it's a totally different problem. So first of all, I will reduce the expectations, not peace. Let's coexist. In order to coexist, I have to be safe. I'm not talking about the moral issues because the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people, period. From my point of view, period. We have to have security. You cannot have security on the seashore when on the mountains you have your enemies, even if they won't define themselves in a state of war with you. Take an example. Nowadays, they're talking about some kind of agreement with the Hamas. What did the Hamas say? Just listen, mostly in Arabic, not in English. Listen in Arabic to the Hamas. We want hudna. They're expressing a different word. We want ceasefire. We want to strengthen our forces because Israel is weakening us all the time. We're hitting the soldiers all the time. So let's have a hudna. Let's have ceasefire, even for 10 years. And after 10 years, we cannot accept Israel. We cannot accept the existence of Israel. So what is this kind of coexistence? If they want to coexist, I want them to say, we want to coexist with you. Let's say the Saudi Arabia initiative. They're talking about 67 borders with the right of return. What is the right of return? They claim to have 5 million refugees. So they want 5 million refugees enter Israel. Israel is 6 million Jews, and we have already 1.2, 1.4 million Arabs. So what do they mean? They mean, okay, give us Judea and Samaria, give us the West Bank, and then Israel will become a two-state solution, a two-national solution in the same state, so no more Jewish state. So I hear it. I'm trying to be frank. I don't see any real desire for peace in the other side. Mm-hmm. So from my point of view, today, the world should fight the extremists, because the extremists can take over Egypt. The Islamic Brotherhood, God forbid, will take over Egypt. They can take, if you're going to go out of Iraq, they will take Iraq. So they will have Syria, Iraq, Iran, maybe Afghanistan, Egypt. And this is not only against us. The missiles of Iran can reach Europe and the United States. United States, not yet, but Europe for sure. The fight is not with us. So first of all, fight the extremists. If the extremists will be weakened and go out of history, then the opportunity to have some kind of talkings and understanding with the moderate Islam is much, much better. Because I believe, as you asked before, there are fathers and mothers along the Arab world, inside the Islamic Brotherhood, the Islamic states, that wants to live. They want to live the regular life. They don't want war. And they are ready to accept others around them. But this can happen only if you fight the extremists.
You know, Shaul, ever since the year 70, when the Romans destroyed the Second Temple, and then for the next virtually 100 years fought with the Jews and ultimately evicted us from Jerusalem, exiled us from Jerusalem, and changed the name of Judea to Palestine, the Jew has always said, Bashana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And it's been a 2,000-year-old dream of the Jewish people to come back to our homeland. Sometimes I imagine that within the Palestinian mentality, there's the same sentiment. They believe, from my perspective wrongly, but they believe, as your friend told you, that in some way the Middle East has become Muslim ground, and that there should be no infidel, no Jewish state on Muslim ground. And if it takes them 2,000 years, they'll wait 2,000 years just like we did. And that they'll fight the state of Israel for 2,000 years if they have to. It seems to be a very pessimistic scenario. When you live in Gush with your family, wife and 7 children, correct? Are you and your wife pessimistic about the near-term and long-term future of the State of Israel?
No, we're very optimistic. I agree with you that the Arab world is developing a false desire to our places. Jerusalem is not mentioned even once in the Quran. It mentions hundreds of times in the Bible. It's obvious that the real war, we don't see any end to it. But
you don't see any end to it?
No, we don't see any end to it. Not in Iraq also, not in Iran also. I don't see anything. But sometimes we cannot take the history where we want. If we were taking this interview in 1930, can you foresee the Second World War? If we were talking about one each near the other, 2 months before the 67 war, 2 months. Can we foresee the 6 Days War and the liberation of Jerusalem and Hebron? If we will see it in the 80s, 85, 86, 87, and I will tell you, we are struggling, let my people go out of Russia. That 10 years after, 1 million Jews will come to Israel from Russia. We are not God. We cannot foresee what God says. I'm not a prophet. I don't think around me I see any prophet. So we cannot know.
That's a nice answer. That's a very nice answer.
We have to stick to the truth, our truth, and to be delicate with the world. We cannot hit other people without any reason. This is very special. If we stick to the truth of ours, and if we see the dream and the prophecy in the Bible, and we understand all the way that God has taken us from. But by the way, I admire your history knowledge. It's remarkable.
Thank you.
I don't see much people like it. So we went to exile about 2,000 years ago. Nobody thought that the Jews will come. But it's written in the prophecy that Jews will come from all over the world. And now in Israel, we see Jews from all over the world. How come? So the line, we're coming back. It's a process. It's a long process. We have to cure our wounds. After exile, we have a lot of wounds. The Israeli society is not perfect. We're not treating each other perfectly. We're not treating the Arabs perfectly. Believe me, I know it. I'm in the army. I served 10 years in the army. I want to improve it. But we are making these efforts to improve all the time, to improve our person-to-person relations, nation-to-nation relations, and everything. But this is a process. So I'm optimistic because I know where I started 2,000 years ago. I know where the end is by the prophecy. I don't know how to get there. I'm not a prophet. I don't see the registrations of God. I cannot tell. I'm wrong, you're wrong. I don't know. I know the pattern. And the pattern is you have to stick to your truth. You have to be modest. You have to know your role in this process. And besides that, wait. So me and my wife are very optimistic.
What is your wife's name?
Ruth.
Ruth. My wife's Ruth, too.
Wow.
Isn't that
what a
lovely?
coincidence.
Isn't that
Wow.
lovely? It gives me goosepimples again.
You know, Ruth was the first one to convert to Judaism. And Ruth, even though she converted, so many Jewish law was learned from Ruth. She was very special. So I married not only the name, by the way, I married the person
I'm
behind
very
it.
happy for you. I'm happy for both of us.
Of course.
Before we end, just speak to the camera. If people want to be in touch with you or Gush Etzion, whom do they contact? How do they do it? Right to the camera.
Hello, everybody. If you agree with some of the things I said, or if not, and you want to visit Gush Etzion, you can do it by the web on gushetzion.org.il, and you'll see many things in Gush Etzion. Second of all, if you want to help us in anything you want to attribute to this kind of way of thinking, visit the site and you'll see exactly how you can help. Come and visit. We'll see you. With God blessing. Thank you.
I can't thank you enough for sharing both heart and mind with me. And I respect your integrity and your honesty, and I respect enormously the work you've done. And I only hope that because of your appearance here with me, that more people will understand exactly the mentality of those in your community who are trying to upbuild the state of Israel. And one of the things we know, Shaul, as you said, these are not easy problems. These are problems that are perhaps sometimes insoluble at the moment, and it takes enormous savlanut, patience, within the Israeli people and the Jewish people, and really humanity as a whole, of goodwill, to understand that there is no quick fix to the kind of problems that are in the state of Israel, both within Israel and between Israel and the Palestinian and Arab community. But from the bottom of my heart, I thank you so much. I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha in your personal life, in your professional life, and I only hope this, that you will let me sit with you whenever I have the opportunity. If I visit Israel or you come again to the United States, that I can continue the discussion with you. Kol tuv, my friend, you are a very special human being. I can't thank you enough. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
And those were the thoughts of Shaul Goldstein, mayor of Gush Etzion, the settlement community southeast of Jerusalem. Of course, as always, I invite you to be in touch with me by email at rabbigalab@shalomtv.com, or visit our website, www.shalomtv.com, to express your reactions to some of the things that Shaul Goldstein has had to say. I'm Mark Golub. Thank you for joining us. Be well, my friends.